this isn't just a violation of civil liberties and the privacy of the people involved, but is actually a waste of security resources. And among anybody here, knows from my experience that there are real threats out there. And I think that's one thing that we have to consider when we talk about particularly the suspicious activity reporting that you'll see when you look at these reports is such a specious idea that collecting this type of information is useful, is that half of the violent crime in this country goes unsolved every year, according to FBI statistics. That includes a third of the murders go unsolved. Last year, in 2012, almost 60% of the rapes in this country go unsolved. So when you're putting security resources toward this type of activity that has no research-based analytics to show it's an effective use of the money, you're taking money away from other programs. And when we talk about the security in this country, everybody tends to bring up terrorism, but as Cato's work has shown, that may not be the biggest threat that communities, particularly urban communities, face. And we need to really turn these resources back toward traditional law enforcement activity. So the ACLU of Massachusetts put out a report. I put some copies up front, but you can find it online. It's called Policing Dissent, Police Surveillance of Law Enforcement Activity in Boston. Our California affiliate recently obtained suspicious activity reportings from Fusion Center in Los Angeles and in Central California. And these reports are eye-opening. And they basically fall into two categories. The ones you shake your head at and say, why in the world would anybody be interested in collecting and documenting this information, particularly because in most cases they fall into what we were worried about, that it's clearly racial profiling, that it's not, the behavior documented itself is not suspicious, but rather the bias of the reporter on who is doing it. So we see things like Middle Eastern males buying several large pallets of water. And I'm not sure what kind of explosive device you can make with water, but I would think, the fact that we have taps in everybody's houses would be fairly dangerous. Also, focusing on political protest. One of them was sort of ironic. Demonstration against law enforcement use of excessive force. Reporting party received an email that describes a scheduled protest by an unknown number of individuals. The information indicates the protesters are concerned about the excessive use of force by law enforcement and also excessive spying by law enforcement, which is why it's a problem to have it in this environment. And the other thing is other First Amendment protected activity like photography. And this is where training becomes an issue because, so often when internal watchdogs identify a problem, the answer is more training. But when we see the training that they've received, it's problematic. When police officers are trained to believe photography is an indicator of terrorism, you can't then be surprised to see how heavily photography is reported. And we have numerous cases where photographers, taking a picture of a bridge or a dam or some other iconic courthouse are all of a sudden braced by law enforcement officers, required to produce ID. Think of the diversion of security resources to stop all these photographers. But it actually gets worse. Because the information is put into these shared databases, they actually later get visited by FBI or DHS officers. So again, the diverting of resources away from true investigations based on reasonable indication of criminal activity toward this specious idea that somebody taking a picture needs to be evaluated for their potential risk, potentially because a lot of these, it's hard to know. Part of the reason why the photography has seemed to jump out so much is photographers are pretty good at documenting things, and they document what's going on pretty well. And you can actually go online and Google YouTube to see, because a lot of photography activists now will record these conversations with law enforcement. And what they're told is, you're acting suspiciously and we want to take your camera and we want, you're not allowed to take a picture of this, you're not allowed to take a picture of that. It's all wrong, and it's it's creating a black hole for resources to continue spinning around, where some of these photographers get visited time and time again. So I would encourage you to go online and look at those suspicious activity reports. And part of the problem is, and I have a lot of discussions with law enforcement and Fusion Center representatives, and there's this idea that chasing down a false lead is somehow evidence of success of the program. When Senator Coburn's report in the Senate Homeland Security came out, there was shortly followed by a House Homeland Security report that was generally a little more supportive of the idea of fusion centers, although it actually was pretty critical, particularly in saying that there weren't metrics to measure success. But this is what the FBI submitted to the committee as a demonstration of the success of the suspicious activity reporting program. On October 8, 2010, the New York Police Department sent an advisory concerning a suspicious tractor trailer whose driver reportedly diverted its route to Times Square in New York City in exchange for $10,000. New York informed several fusion centers in the affected area. The Rhode Island State Fusion Center discovered that the original owner of the truck was a California native and asked the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center to run a background check based on the owner's information. Within 2 hours of the advisory's release, information from these two fusion centers were used to coordinate the Connecticut Intelligence Center, which enabled the Connecticut State Police to locate the tractor trailer before it reached its reported target in New York City. The Connecticut State Police searched the vehicle, questioned the driver and passenger, and concluded the vehicle was not a threat. But this shows how it works. Even though I'm sure that there were robberies, there were rapes, there were traffic accidents, there were serious security concerns in Connecticut and Rhode Island and California during the time that everybody's chasing their tail on a specious idea that this was something that needed to be chased down that quickly. Part of the problem is, and I think that there is a better way for the federal government to address this. I mean, one of the things that Eileen suggested that there aren't federal tools to address state and local law enforcement. And I just want to push back against that a little bit because there is a federal regulation. So this has been on the books since the 1980s, put there to curb the abuses of the 1970s, where many state and local police organizations had red squads that would go out and investigate political activity. And all that it really would take is enforcing that regulation. But instead, the Justice Department is actually encouraging the violation of that through these programs. And the fact that there are two separate programs, the Information Sharing Environment and the FBI eGuardian, I think what the GAO report shows is that there's a race to the bottom, right? The program that has the higher standards gets less information, so therefore there's no incentive to doing that. So the FBI having a program that had less standards then became the more popular program, and it's caused the ISE now to try to reduce its standards. And again, where the type of information that's being collected, and when you look at the suspicious activity reports collected in California, it notes which ones are sent to eGuardian, or in the LAPD which ones were sent to the Joint Terrorism Task Forces. So we know which ones are being submitted through the system, and it's clearly not based on any reasonable indication of criminal activity. And then that's one reason why I think the FBI is reluctant to provide GAO with any statistics that would show arrest as a result of these programs. So, our third FOIA that we've done recently that's also online is the FBI's eGuardian. And one of the interesting things that we got through those documents is that many of the state and local law enforcement authorities were actually pushing back against the pervasive sharing eGuardian system allowed. So, the federal system is something that should be working for our privacy rights, and I think can work. And if these fusion centers were set up in a way where they could regulate this collection rather than just encourage it, I think that might be another curb on the federal government. So there are ways to move forward, but I think we have to have much more sunlight on what exactly is happening, and require, as Jim suggests, that when these agencies claim these programs are necessary, that we challenge that and look at it from a cost-benefit analysis.